Whether you're dreaming of a retirement with sand between your toes and a cold one in your hand, hitting the road to chase the winds of adventure, or spending time with your grandchildren, this show is intended to help you get there. Welcome to Coasting in Retirement with your host, Josh Knoll. You've worked too hard throughout your career to spend your retirement worrying. So sit back, kick up your feet, because we've got lots of financial tips and tricks to share to help you get exactly where you want to be. Here's Josh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in. Welcome to Coasting in Retirement. That's right. So Josh Knoll here, alongside co-host Michelle Lee Melton, my radio partner in crime, my midnight rider, my, do I say Auburn or Opelika lady?
You say AO area.
Area. Well, you're here to help this Ozark country boy with my 3-syllable words. How you doing?
I am tired and sweaty because I did site visits earlier today.
Yeah, you had a real job.
Yes,
not the millions that we make from this radio show.
That's right.
That's right. All right. So, well, Michelle, I'm doing great. I'm excited to be back here recording in Coastal College's recording studio located here in beautiful downtown Fairhope. And I'm even more excited about the show we have today because, as usual, we got another killer show for those of you tuning in. So,
All right. All
right. So, listeners, Michelle and I are here today to discuss financial topics relevant to those of you in or near retirement, living your best life here along our part of the Gulf Coast. If you're just tuning into our show, welcome. You're listening to what we consider Lower Alabama's most dynamic financial radio show anyway. Here's what we got in store for you today. First segment, deep dive on our topic of the day. Second segment, it's about 15 minutes past the hour. Fan favorite, Michelle with the news of the week. Third segment, roughly 30 minutes past the hour, you will hear a good old-fashioned roast of yours truly with our Josh's Crystal Ball and Big Mouthpiece.
It's a lot of fun.
It is. So buckle up. We got to pack a lot in and be ready to be both entertained and enlightened. Also, for those of you new to the show, quick background on me. Again, my name is Josh Knoll. I am a fee-based financial advisor. I hold my FINRA Series 65 securities license, and I'm the owner of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. That's an independent investment management and financial planning firm with offices in Fairhope and Orange Beach.
Yes.
That's right. New office.
We were there earlier this week.
We were for our second client meeting.
That's right.
It was great. You can find more information on me and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors by visiting our website, gulfcoastfa.com, or feel free to give us a call at 251-327-2124. Now, if you missed that, don't worry. We repeat our contact info several times throughout the show. All right, so let's get to our main topic of the day. Today's episode is going to be the most personal one that I've done to date. It's about something that has affected me and my family very deeply. It also kind of has ties to the recent hit show called Succession.
Ugh. Well, 3 episodes in, and it was boring to me.
Yeah,
Other people think differently in our immediate circle, but I got better things to do.
Well, at its
time
root,
is precious.
At the root of the show, Michelle, is going to be what we're talking about today.
I get that.
Yeah, so here, let's start, since you came in, let's start with a question to you.
Okay.
As someone with a law degree,
right?
Someone that has helped many people write their wills, what is the hardest part of putting together a last will and testament?
Well, the first thing is people accepting their own mortality. That's true. But also come to brass tacks with your family and heirs and or loved ones about how much stuff you do or don't got.
Well, so not only coming to terms with your own mortality, but also having those awkward and uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. And so would you say that's why so many people put off writing a will?
Yes, I think that's
100%.
Yeah.
Well, so I agree with that. And what we're going to do, Michelle, we're going to make that the foundation of today's topics. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to discuss 5 steps on how to not screw up passing your wealth to your heirs, with obviously some of the discussion centered around having a will. Before we do this, though, I want to give a quick story on how this particular issue has affected me so personally. So, folks, my family listens to this show. Most of my family's back in Missouri. So I'm going to tread a little lightly because the wounds from this story that I'm about to tell are still pretty raw. Most of our regular listeners and our existing clients know that I am originally from the Ozarks of Missouri, specifically what's called the foothills, which is just north of what is called the Boot Hill.
I was going to say, that was a Boot Hill.
Well, I'm just north of the Boot Hill.
It's basically Arkansas.
It's pretty close. So I come from a big family on my dad's side. Now, my mom's side of the family was small growing up. As she has gotten older and branched out to some of her other family members, the size of her family has grown. But this story is going to concentrate on my dad's side, which for most of my life was a pretty close-knit family. The patriarch and the matriarch of this branch of the family were my grandma and grandpa Null, Eldon and Virgie. I was very close to both of them, particularly my grandma Virgie. And, like a lot of kids out in the country, I spent a significant part of my youth at their house. So what we're going to do, rewind many decades ago. My grandpa started buying land in our part of the country, southeast Missouri. He eventually accumulated about 600 acres. My family utilized the land for various businesses, various purposes. And because we were country in our country, we like to name things in a practical sense. So there was the pig farm.
Ew.
There was the sawmill. My grandma had a hamburger and ice cream stand. There was the lumber yard. You get the idea. I even had a mama dog by my side for my entire youth. So we didn't have a great imagination on naming things.
You weren't very creative.
But all you had to know was, meet me at the sawmill. You knew exactly where to go. So with all of this family-centric activity in the eyes of a young boy, I thought we were just one big happy family making a go of it in a rural area where, as my dad would sometimes say, you have to work twice as hard to make half as much. So you kind of get a mental picture there. Fast forward many years to say about 12, 13 years ago. This will get us back to our topic of the day. Both my grandma and grandpa died within a few weeks of each other after,
That's sweet. Somebody died of heartbreak.
Yeah, my grandpa called a shot. It was pretty powerful. But they had been married, I believe, 73 years plus.
Wow.
They left behind 6 surviving children. And while they had prepared several beneficiary deeds for this land that I was referring to, they had not written a final will and testament, at least not one that I'd ever heard of. So to make a long story short, after my grandma and grandpa passed, over the ensuing years, these beneficiary deeds end up being challenged in court. And as time went on, my once close family was torn apart. We had brothers and sisters taking each other to court, my aunts and my uncles. We had multiple disputes on what defined someone's rightful inheritance. And eventually, and unfortunately, a pretty significant chunk of those 600 acres ended up getting sold on the courthouse steps. So thankfully, we were in a position to purchase many of the most important pieces of land back to our family. But as you all can imagine hearing this story, the whole process took a really tough emotional toll on my family. Now, I tell that story, and I've hesitated telling it for a long time. It's the first time I've told it publicly. It's going to come off as I'm being judgmental to both my grandparents and to my aunts, my uncles, and all that. I'm not. It's not meant to be. I do believe they all tried to find a solution for years, but at the end of the day, the avoidance of a really, really hard type of conversations led to the lack of one final complete plan for what happens after my grandparents died. I tell you all this story because some of you are listening right now and you're nodding your head. Maybe it's your parents that are in their twilight years and it's been hard to nail down a final plan, or maybe you yourself are struggling with some of the details of how you want your inheritance to go on to the next generation or to your heirs. Whatever the case may be, today what Michelle and I want to accomplish are to give you all some guidance on how to potentially avoid what happened to my family and has happened to so many other families out there. And so what we did, because Michelle likes odd numbers, likes odd numbers, we broke it down into 5 easy steps that, to be fair, in and of themselves, one, some of them are not going to be a surprise to you all, and 2, they won't necessarily guarantee family harmony, especially around something that can be so very emotional at times. But I promise you that if you follow these steps, you will at least get closer to leaving this earth with some peace about your legacy. So, all right, Michelle, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so here we go. Here are the 5 steps on how to not screw up passing on your wealth to your heirs. We'll list them out each, and then we'll circle back to each one individually. Number 1, should be pretty obvious so far. Have a written last will and testament, and if necessary, have an estate plan. We're going to go into more depth on this, but a quick note. You don't always have to have a large estate to need an estate plan.
That's right.
If your estate is, quote unquote, small, estate plans can also be very useful when there's, for example, there's special needs or I guess in my case, an outlaw/in-law lurking in the shadows waiting on your demise.
Yes.
Right? Number 2, 5 steps on how not to screw up passing your wealth on to your heirs. Have a conversation with your heirs. It more likely than not, it may be uncomfortable. Not always. I mean, there's some families out there that are pretty open on this. I tried, you say you learn from this, you learn from the sins of the past. I tell my 3 children, I don't love you all equally. I love you uniquely. And when it comes time down the road to pass on whatever I have, there's no way mathematically it's going to be perfectly equal. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that doesn't work out that way.
So, and then also from my experience, all these conversations, they are uncomfortable. Now, what we're going to make the case on—
You can make a lawyer do it.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
If it's going to be super uncomfortable, I would go a step further, Michelle. I'd say have your professional team help you.
There you go.
Who's your professional team typically? Typically, it is a attorney, sometimes an estate attorney. Typically, it's a financial planner, like what I do. And a lot of times, often, if you've got a CPA that's been around for a number of years and knows your business or your estate very well, they're pretty handy. So that's your professional team for a lot of folks that have built up a sizable estate. Okay, number 3, on things to do to help with passing on your legacy. We told you all, for your regular listeners, if you caught our last episode, we told you to ignore most of the news. We used the news around the debt ceiling as an example. Now, ignore news on the debt ceiling, but don't ignore news about the estate tax exclusion, which is otherwise known as the death tax. As opposed to the debt ceiling, the estate tax exclusion is a political football that can have a real impact on your family, especially since there's some of the provisions sunsetting here in the next handful of
That's
years. Right. All right, number 4, if possible, think about helping your heirs while you're still alive and at a time when they could probably use the assistance. One small example is the gift tax exclusion for 2023 is $17,000 per person or $34,000 per married couple. You had something to say, Michelle?
Oh, I support this one a lot.
Right.
Because also you can lower the value of the estate while you're still alive. You can see your loved ones enjoy it as opposed to maybe them squabbling about it after your demise.
Well, think about like with the movie Succession. For those of you who have seen it,
It's a show.
I've only seen bits and pieces, but he kind of held it over everybody's head for years, right?
Right.
Right. Better just to, if you can, if it works, maybe start thinking about helping your heirs while you're all still alive and they could probably use it the most. And then number 5 on things to do to not screw up passing your wealth onto your heirs. So let's say you're in a great spot and you've done more than what you feel is enough to leave a legacy to your heirs. In this case, consider charitable.
Charitable.
There you go. Three syllables there. Gifts to organizations that you believe in. One of the most powerful ways to teach kids, even adult children, to be responsible with money is to give it away to worthwhile causes. It has a lot of power. So, all right, Michelle, let's dive into each individually and quickly. Let's talk about the one that you're probably most familiar with, having a written last will and testament, and if necessary, an estate plan. So kind of give the listeners a brief idea with what your process is when you are sitting down to help somebody write a last will, because it's not overly complicated.
No, it's actually, usually there's only about 6 to 7 sections in a will. So if you want to do trust, it gets a little bit more complicated. But other than that,
for example, what would be like a couple of those questions?
What's your marital status, if one?
Okay.
What
are your heirs?
What are your heirs? You got to name the full names. Yes, of the children.
Right.
And then you have to have how it's going to pass on. Is it going to go all the way to the spouse? Usually that's how it goes. Mm-hmm. But you could not do that in some states and just give it to your children, or you can leave out some children in some states.
Well, which we were going to talk about in our Michelle with the News of the Week.
Yeah.
Right? All right. So with that too, Michelle, I know that the most important part of the will is to identify the large issues, if you will. If, like in my family's example, the hundreds of acres, for other people it might be their investment accounts, things like that. But you also need to go ahead and take the time to drill down to the smaller stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Usually you have an addendum to it if you're going to itemize what you want. And you can say the 600 acres goes, 6 different ways. And
right.
Josh gets 90%.
That's how it should be. That was not how the case was,
right,
but that was okay.
Well, that would be your parents anyway. But
that's right. Yeah, and so, folks, the main point of that is you can do this stuff online. That's fine. I mean, the technology has come a long way, but it's really a fairly affordable thing to at least do a last will and testament.
Truth.
Right, Michelle?
Yeah.
Even estate plans, even if you've got a fairly complicated estate, the expense relative to the amount of pain, aggravation, potential taxes.
Sanity.
Everything. It's fractions of what it could cost you in the long run. All right, number 2, having a conversation with your heirs. Now, this is one where, again, firsthand experience.
Don't have any.
I saw my grandma and grandpa, what would happen more often than not is they would have a conversation. They had 7 children at one time. My uncle Richard passed away before my grandma and grandpa passed. But a lot of times they would have a conversation with 1 or 2 at one time, and sometimes the story got kind of
lost in translation.
It got lost in what's that called, that game? Telephone game?
Yes.
Yeah, the telephone game, right? Now, again, that's not to be judgmental of what they were saying. I know that, having spent so much time with my grandma and grandpa, being so close to the majority of my family, they always wanted to do the right thing. They put their children first in every way. But often they would have situations where they felt maybe kind of like they were getting pushed into a corner, and they basically wanted to make peace. Well, that's fine. It's good to make peace. But there comes a point with this, especially if you've got a sizable estate and you've got multiple heirs, where you're just not going to make everybody happy. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, sadly,
right?
but that's reality.
And I can just tell you all that, again, from my experience, if you can have this conversation, if you can lay it out, even laying out the reasoning why somebody is not going to get something exactly equal as the other person. Again, remember what I said about my 3 children. I don't love them equally. I love them uniquely. And that's going to happen. That's going to be how it's going to be with your estate. There's going to be, for you business owners, more often than not, there's going to be 1 or 2 of your heirs that are particularly children. They're going to be more involved in your business.
That's right.
It would only make sense if they were the ones that carried on the business legacy. There's going to be some that are going to be more involved possibly with your end-of-life caregiving. Maybe that's the ones where you look at what happens with the home site. You want to do these things, but I can tell you again, one more time from experience, if you're super uncomfortable having this conversation, if you have a professional team in place, it helps. Not that a good professional team is not going to care. They're going to have empathy, but they're not going to have their own skin in the game necessarily.
Right.
So they can be dispassionate about the choices being made. Okay. Number 3, on things to do here, so you don't screw up your passing on your wealth. Pay attention to the estate tax exclusion. There was a time, and I don't have the numbers from Michelle because I didn't want it to become a boring math show. But the estate tax exclusion one time was, I think, $600,000, and not that many years ago. What does that mean? That means that if your estate was above that estate tax exclusion of $600,000, or I think it was 1.1 million at one time, if it was above that the amount above and beyond that would be taxed at whatever the estate tax was at that time. And typically, I believe it's around 40%. Now, right now, we've got a relatively high estate tax exclusion. I believe it's in the neighborhood of 24 million per married couple, 12.7 million, I think, a piece, nearly 25 or 25.2 for both. The point being is right now it affects a very, very, very small percentage of families, but that number is going to sunset. In 2026, it is projected to go down to half of that amount. And I can tell you again, as contrasted to the debt ceiling that has been talked about 78 times and past 78 times, the estate tax exclusion gets changed often. It's a political football that can actually hit you in the face.
Is it volatile?
It's very volatile. It goes up and down quite a bit. All right. Number 4, things you need to do so you don't screw it up. If possible, think about helping your heirs while they're still alive. Michelle supports this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's checks and balances too, because if you dole it out, you can see if they're using it for your grandchildren or keeping up the homestead or what have you,
Yeah, if they go out and start buying a bunch of fancy cars
and
fancy
it should
boats,
be pretty, that's true. And it should be pretty therapeutic for the grantor, to see them hopefully using it well and enjoying it while they're still alive and not in the grave.
Well, and to be fair to the story I told about my family, my grandma and grandpa did a great job of that. They helped my dad get his business going in excavating. They helped my uncle and my dad start a lumber yard. They've done a lot of things with my aunts and my uncles to help them. The thing was, over so many years, they had to help them differently.
Sure.
Yeah, different kids had different needs.
Yeah, and in the end, you might have to adjust your will to reflect how you helped some of them.
You try
earlier
in
life.
But it's hard.
It is,
right? Because it's hard to reconcile what is really at the end of the day.
Sometimes siblings don't always know what the parents did for the other sibling.
Bingo. Thank you. You're cutting 100% through the chase here. All right. Very good. Definitely try it if you can. And again, the last thing I'll say on that, Michelle, is people are living longer than ever. Something we talk about on this show. Right, a lot of times, grandma and grandpa.
We're lucky to be old.
Right, grandma and grandpa got into their 70s, and they're on. They're about to check out, and kids are in their 40s or 50s, and all of a sudden, they get an inheritance. Well, now grandma and grandpa might be like my grandma 96 and 89. Kids were already in their 50s and 60s. Again, not that they didn't help them during that time period, they did, but in some instances, it's great if you can help the people while they mainly need it, especially for a lot of people trying to build their career. All right, last one. This is fun, and I do have some clients in this spot. They've done a great job. They've buttoned it all up. They got a great estate. They've put their will in, and they've got their estate plan in place, and they've got a portion of their estate carved out for charitable giving. Right? Michelle's big on charitable giving.
I am.
Yes, you give to a lot of different organizations.
I do.
And one of the cool things to do if you're in that position is to give to a church, community organization, anything you believe in that you see them doing worthwhile causes. It's a really fun way to leave a legacy behind, especially if it's something like with Michelle or some of these organizations she's been involved with for years.
That's right.
Right. Very good. All right. Well, folks, if you're interested in continue the conversation around these things we just talked about, I will tell you that we are not, well, I got to say this, we got to do a little disclaimer. I am not an attorney, so keep that in mind. I work with estate planning attorneys. Michelle, while she has her law degree, doesn't actively practice law in the state of Alabama.
That's right.
Right. But you still are able to help people with wills and trusts, right?
Yes.
All right. So,
And do.
yeah, so that's a little disclaimer. However, if you're interested in having that conversation, we have a team of great referral partners around estate planning, around writing wills and last testaments. These are people that we've worked with for a lot of years, and we all come together, and it's really kind of, I don't want to say it's necessarily a one-stop shop, but it'll give you a lot of peace of mind if you want to give us a call and start walking down that road. You can call us at 251-327-2124, or of course, you can always find us at our website, gulfcoastfa.com. That's GULF, like the Gulf of Mexico, Coast. FA is in financialadvisor.com. You can leave us a message there as well. All right, folks, coming up next, there's always a lot going on in the world, particularly the world of finance. And this past week was certainly an example of big news of finance, like always, right, Michelle?
Yes.
All right, so every week,
Good and or bad.
that's right, every week, Michelle and I scour what she calls the interwebs for helpful financial articles related to our topic of the day, especially articles that pertain to those of you in or near retirement. So why don't you join us after the break to hear Michelle and I discuss this week's relevant headlines in our Michelle with the News of the Week segment. Stay tuned.
Support for coasting and retirement is provided by Synergy Home Care of Daphne. At Synergy, we understand that people are happiest and healthiest where they are most comfortable, in their own homes. From companionship to around-the-clock care, we offer a range of in-home care services so your elder loved one can confidently age in place in the familiarity and comfort of their own home. In addition to seniors, we proudly provide wholehearted in-home care and support services to your loved ones who are living with a chronic condition, recovering from cancer, illness, or surgery. From personal assistance with bathing and dressing to senior companion care to fight isolation and loneliness, to support with housekeeping, errand, and transportation services, sometimes just a little extra help at home can make all the difference. You can reach Synergy Home Care at their Daphne location by calling 251-621-1900. That's 251-621-1900, or by visiting synergyhomecare.com. SYNERGY homecare.com. Mention you heard us on Coasting and Retirement and receive 10% off your first month's service.
Welcome back to Coasting and Retirement. Your host, Josh Knoll here. So as we discussed before the break, every week Michelle and I scour what she calls the interwebs for helpful financial articles related to our topic of the day. We try to find articles that pertain to those of you in or near retirement. Michelle and I are going to help you all understand and decipher the deeper meaning of these headlines, or I guess at the very least provide some context. So without further ado, here's Michelle with the news of the week.
All right, Josh, let's start with a news site I found called The Balance. They have a recent article titled How to Protect Your Estate and Inheritance from Taxes. This article is super in-depth and does a great job of breaking down the difference between estate taxes, which is the overall value of the estate at the time of individual's death, and inheritance taxes, which is unfortunately what your beneficiaries will pay. So unfair. Anyway,
Right.
So they go on, they listing the states that have their own estate taxes, and a side note, Alabama does not. When? Okay. So I also think this article does a great job of explaining the difference between revocable and irrevocable trust in plain English. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I do. I think it was a great article you found. It also gave a brief history of the federal estate tax laws.
Yes.
Which in the opening segment, we were talking about news that people should pay attention to and news that people should not. And I referenced that back when I didn't have the numbers in front of me, that the estate tax exclusion was $600,000 at one time. Well, come to find out, that was just in 1997.
And it's going to be cut in half this year?
Well, not this year.
Or sunsets?
Well, so let me give you a little bit of history here.
Okay.
It was increased to $1 million in 2006. Now, $1 million is $1 million, right?
I'll take it.
But there's a lot of people that have estates that are considerably more than $1 million, right? So
a lot.
Right. What happened with various legislation over a couple different presidents is that exemption has been increased kind of up and up over a period of about a decade until this year. It's somewhere a little bit north of 12 million It's like 12,700,000. If I'm wrong, listeners, apologize, but it's somewhere in the 12 million vicinity for 2023. Of course, it's double that if you're a married couple. But what Michelle was referring to is there was what is commonly referred as the Trump tax bill. That high estate tax exclusion is going to be sunsetted in 2026. Right now, if there's no changes made, it will go to roughly half, which based on current math is about 6.4 million per person. Again, 6.4 million per person times 2, that's 12.8. That's still a sizable number. But again, you need to pay attention to what's going on with the estate tax exclusion because there's nothing set in stone. The only thing set in stone at this point related to it is that Congress can charge it. They made that change 100 years ago. The part that is not set in stone is how much is that exclusion going to be. And for those of you all that own a business, those of you all, let's pick on Baldwin County.
Okay.
Those of you all that own land in Baldwin County that maybe you bought years ago, kind of like, or maybe your parents or your grandparents did, like my grandparents did. You bought this land years ago, and as opposed to Wapapello, which has not seen any real population growth, Baldwin County is one of the...
It might have declined.
It may have declined, but Baldwin County is one of the fastest growing counties in the United States.
That's right.
And consequently, the value of that land has, 5x, 10x, 20x?
Yes.
Who knows? And you may, if you get a fair appraisal
Even
on that,
swampland.
even swampland, you get a fair appraisal on that land, you may be surprised. So yeah, that's a great article. For those of you all listening to this, if you want to see the full article, we put the transcript of this radio show up on my website, gulfcoastfa.com, including links to our reference articles. It's a great article, very well written. Good job, Michelle. What you got next?
So the next one is actually from your website. Did you write this article?
I thought you put me on the spot. So I get my website is through a provider that gives me some pretty nice blogs to use.
Okay.
Some of the blogs I've written on my website because I like to write and read and talk a lot, apparently. This one I did not, but I thought it was really good, so I added it.
Oh, well, I was going to give you mad props. Just kidding. But it is on your website.
It is.
Gulf Coast Financial Advisors.
GulfCoastFA.com. What's the
right.
title? Which one? I have a bunch on there.
It's actually what you've been talking about. Are you prepared for an estate tax sunset?
Here we go.
So this brings up the 2026, the current state exemption of $12.92 million per person. Big numbers. That was part of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is set to expire. The future amount is projected to be reduced by roughly half to about $6.4 million per person. For states that exceed that amount, the federal tax rate will be set at 40%, in addition to those states that charge their own estate tax. Given that we're almost halfway through 2023, do you see this playing out as it was written in 2017, or do you see more changes to the estate tax exemption?
Well, so the estate tax exemption just escaped a lot of changes with the Build Back Better legislation that came through.
Yes.
Those of you all that pay attention that have estates, you'll recognize what I'm about to say, but there was pressure to eliminate the step-up basis related to capital gains in some of there was talk around doing things with long-held positions in stocks. There was talk about making changes for land that had been held for a long time and losing that step-up basis. So to answer your question, yes, I do see, particularly as we're coming into a election environment, election year coming up next year, it's one of those things that it is very easy to use as a political football. You can simply say, hey, we are, even though, Michelle, I think it affects less than 1% of the total national debt. I don't even mean to make light of the national debt.
Sounds made up.
I don't mean to make light of people passing on estates. The point of it is, even though it is a fraction of anything that makes a whole big chunk of difference in the end game, what it is, it's an easy talking point for a lot of politicians. They can pivot. They can say, hey, we're letting these rich people pass on these estates without any taxes. And to be fair, there's an argument to be made, but I'm going to give you from my perspective, as somebody that grew up, as we talked earlier about, that lived up on the north end, the northern part of the Boot Hill. The Boot Hill is mostly farmers. And as anybody can tell you that grew up in that area in the 80s, it was hard to be a farmer.
I can imagine.
Yeah, you owned a bunch of land that you probably didn't pay a ton for, at least at the time, and you had to scratch and claw to make a living. Fast forward, I'm not saying in 2023 every farmer's just got it made, but the value of that land has gone up significantly. And now these quote unquote, rich people sitting around doing nothing, now they may have exposure to being above and beyond the estate tax exemption amount. And that's real. That's real people out there working, trying to pass on a family farm or family business to somebody else. If this estate tax gets lowered far enough down, well, now they've got an issue. They've got to look at developing some process or program to handle that transition of wealth. Fortunately, that's one of the things that we do in our partnership with our estate tax, with our state attorney, planning attorneys, and with some of the tax planning we do. We can help with that. 251-327-2124. That's a pretty pertinent article you found there.
And I think in this
On my
article,
website.
it brought up, yes, Josh did not write, but that life insurance is usually not subject to the estate taxes, which I was not aware of.
Yeah, typically held outside of. I'm sure there's exceptions that we're going to say generally, but typically held outside. Because sometimes, Michelle, it's a great point. Michelle, sometimes you do use life insurance in the passing on of the estate. That's a great point.
Yeah.
All right.
So far in this segment, we've discussed issues from the view of the person leaving the inheritance behind. Let's move to the other side and discuss challenges facing heirs. Personal credit rating site Experian has an article simply titled, "What to Do with an Inheritance." I've got tons of ideas, but I don't know if I'll ever get one. Okay, here's some of the author's common sense advice. Park your money in a high-yield savings account. That makes sense. Pay off your debt. That sounds even better. And buy a bigger boat. However, I don't think that one's in there. I think it actually advises against buying a boat altogether.
I slipped that right into the outline.
Okay. So just kidding. That's actually not in the article. Josh put it in there. So anyway, as someone that has helped your clients both pass on wealth and manage inherited wealth, what do you think the biggest mistakes heirs make are?
Well, this one's actually pretty easy, Michelle. More often than not, in a lot of, not more often than not, a lot of times in a family dynamic, when there is a sizable estate passed on to the next generation, it's more often than not the largest chunk of money or assets that person has ever received at one single point in time. So let's focus on what if it's money being passed on. I've seen people inherit 50 grand. I've seen them inherit 500,000. I've seen them inherit 5 million. The ones that had the biggest problem with it it's kind of the same issue that you see related to people that win the lottery. Not that the people receiving the inheritance weren't savvy or didn't have their own processes and ways that they handle their own finances, but they've got this huge injection of cash and they don't have the perspective, and especially if they were inherited from somebody that ran a business and maybe they've never actually gotten to the nitty-gritty of that said business, they don't have perspective on how quick 50,000 or 500,000 or sometimes even 5 million can go away if you make the wrong choices. And so you see somebody that gets a big chunk of money and maybe they've held out on certain lifestyle choices. Maybe now they decide to buy a bigger house. Maybe they decide to buy a fancy car. Maybe they decide to buy a big boat. That might be my weakness. But all of a sudden they look up and the money's gone. And this thing that whoever, whether it was parents or grandparents or whoever passed that money on, this thing that they had been maybe sitting there thinking was coming to them for a number of years and that they were going to enjoy for a number of years, now is gone within a matter of a couple of years. And it's devastating. I mean, it really needs, it's one of the things we wanted to bring up in this show, Michelle, was it's not only important that the person's giving away the inheritance has conversation, has professional guidance and professional assistance, but it's almost as important, maybe even more important, and one would argue, that the person receiving said inheritance has some professional guidance. Somebody, we've talked about this on the show, Michelle. My client's money is their own. I'm not here to tell them exactly what to do with it or with not, but I'm also going to have more of a 30,000-foot view of the whole situation. I'm going to have years of experience of seeing people deal with money, both in small and large amounts. And I can come in and say, hey, at your burn rate, you're in trouble. We need to make different choices. And that has that can help. And if it's not me, it's somebody else that does what I do. We're not here to slap your hand necessarily, but we definitely can give you guidance if it's the first time you've ever handled that significant amount, or if you're dealing with issues with other heirs, how to manage and smooth all that out. So very good. That's my point on that.
Okay.
All right. We got time for one more?
Do we? Okay. Let's go. So I decided to lighten it up for our last article, talking about death and whatnot, and ended up going down a rabbit hole, which I enjoy. Shout out to Dolce & Gabbana, which is Josh's resident wild rabbits. They're in his neighborhood. But if you want to get sucked into a silly information cortex, just Google, quote, funny inheritance stories, and there are plenty from Wills, Trust and Estates and law school, too. So there are dozens of articles and hundreds of search results. I narrowed it down to a couple of my favorites. First, did you know that in 1928, an anonymous British citizen donated £500,000 to the United Kingdom's government with the express written instructions that it be used to pay down the UK's national debt. What a sucker.
Right.
Anyway, don't they have other things to do that? King
he's
and
still
queen and
anonymous
stuff?
to this day.
Yes.
All right.
And that money actually sat in an investment account for over 90 years and grew to over $640 million in value. I don't know what it is in pounds or whatever they do.
I think it's probably about 480 million pounds.
Okay.
That'd be my guess.
Okay.
Somewhere around there.
Because no one could work out the legality of using it as intended. It's complete weak sauce. Spend that money, but maybe not because they did it. I wonder if they ever did. I don't know. But so, and this had Leona Helmsley as the creative director of Chanel, and maybe this is a widespread Chanel phenomenon.
Okay.
But allegedly, she left her entire $150 million fortune to her cat when she died in 2019. Now, Karl Lagerfeld did the same thing to his cat.
Is he a Chanel guy too?
Yes.
I didn't
and
know what
his cat,
Chanel is, to be honest with you.
It's fashion.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
Started
why
in
I don't know.
1920s. Coco Chanel.
Can I buy
What?
it
She survived 2 world wars.
Can I buy it at Walmart or Sam's?
Neither.
Oh, well, then
It's
I don't know.
high
Then I don't.
fashion.
I have no use for Chanel. Sorry.
I do. So anyway, but Chopette, which is Karl Lagerfeld's cat, is living the dream. And he also has a team of people taking care of this animal in his Parisian apartment complex, which is very ornate. And I feel like they're probably doing a good job because they're getting paid handsomely too to do it. And he might come back from the grave or something. So anyway, in order to do that, sometimes people cut out their grandchildren totally out of their will or their own children. So anyway, I could literally go on with stories like these. They leave it to the family parrot sometimes, and the parrot can talk, and sometimes the parrot talks bad about other people that were left in the will. That was the case in Denver and Colorado in law school, but actually happened. So I have no idea what to say about this information, but I'm very amused, and I encourage other people to be amused when they're considering writing their wills and what they're going to do, and maybe read that to get some giggles and what not to do.
Well, I don't know what to tell you if you're somebody that's leaving your $150 million to a cat. Yeah, I mean, you're as much as I would like to manage.
I mean, maybe to some cat's society, that finds homes for
maybe
these feral cats in Venice or something. I don't know. But
well, okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about quickly. That's just the power of compound interest there, because £500,000, 500,000 pounds. 1928,
yes,
probably conservatively invested, was 500 million pounds 90 years later. That is, Einstein said, the most powerful force in the universe is the power of compound interest. There's your example of that.
Yeah.
So, all right, great way to end it.
Wow.
All right, Michelle, great job as always with the headlines. These are all important pieces of information that impact those in or near retirement. Listeners, if you have questions around the topics in our headlines of the week, or questions related to your individual investment strategy or financial plan, why don't you give us a call at 251-327-2124 to set up a conversation. You can also set up an appointment. It's no obligation, no fee, no pressure. Or you can always reach out to us on our website at gulfcoastfa.com. That's GULFCOAST, FA as in financialadvisor.com. All right, folks, coming up next, Josh's crystal ball.
And your big mouth.
My big mouth. What have been some of my predictions? Have I been right? Was I ever wrong? Well, how wrong? What do I think is going to affect investors in the near future? We talk about all these things and poke a little fun at my big mouth. Stay tuned.
Imagine for a moment that an intense storm is pounding your house. Will your roof leak? Will the siding peel away? Will your basement flood? If your house is properly built and maintained, you'll be fine. What about your 401k or investments? The stock market has had a great run the last few years, but is its current turmoil making you feel uneasy? Are you confident your portfolio is built to weather a financial storm? Well, now might be a great time to get a second opinion on your retirement plan. Call Josh Knoll and the team at Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, 251-333-5151. They'll examine your portfolio and show you if your investments are in need of some weatherproofing. Get your no-obligation second opinion by calling Josh Knoll and the team at Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, 251-333-5151. Don't let your retirement get caught in the rain. 251-333-5151.
Advisory services offered through Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, a federally registered investment advisor. PCIA 6201 College Boulevard, Suite 150, Overland Park, Kansas 66211. PCIA doing business as Prime Capital Wealth Management and Qualified Plan Advisors. PCIA and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors are not affiliated.
Welcome back. Your host, Josh Knoll here, alongside co-host Michelle Lee Melton. So, folks, I am opinionated. I do have strong opinions at times. Michelle's laughing already.
Yeah.
I would say, and Michelle, to be fair, a radio show host that isn't opinionated to some degree wouldn't be very interesting
That's
to listen
true.
to, right?
Yeah.
And I am paid in my profession to offer professional guidance and opinions to my clients. Otherwise, I'd say, what use am I?
Yeah, lukewarm's no good.
Right. Sometimes I feel so strongly about something that I talk about it publicly, the various podcasts and radio shows that I've had. Sometimes I'll even make predictions. And while I feel like I'm usually proved right,
we'll see about that,
because I'm fairly skeptical, there are times where I swing and I miss. So listeners want to hear me a little crow.
Of course.
Then let's get at it with Josh's crystal ball and big mouth. All right, Michelle, what's first?
Okay. So Josh, just last episode, we discussed meme stocks, which still remind me of emojis and dancing bears and tutus, and with Rivian being one of them at the time. You went on to say that even though Rivian had a $14 billion market valuation, it had only delivered about 100 vehicles, maybe 1,000 to buyers. Well, it appears that Rivian actually delivered 7,946 vehicles in the first quarter of 2023 alone, which was about the same amount they delivered in the fourth quarter of 2022.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, so your estimate was way off. So do you still hold that Rivian's stock price is way higher than it should be or not?
So I was prepared for this one. I knew this would come back to bite me.
Right. I knew you were wrong when you said that. There's no way.
All right. So here's some numbers, Michelle. All
okay.
Right. Rivian's market cap of this week, of recording this week, is $14 billion. Now, what does that mean? That means the value of all the outstanding stock, if you sold it all at one time, if there was one buyer, it has a total value of $14 billion. That $14 billion is based on revenue, first quarter revenue of $661 million. I remember that, listeners. Now, in the last episode, which you can find if you all go to Spotify and look for Coasting Retirement, you can hear what we're actually talking about. But I compared Rivian to Ford in my argument, basically saying, Ford had delivered more vehicles before coffee in the morning than Rivian has in entire history. Now, I was a little off, so yeah, fine. My big mouth was wrong. But here's some numbers to remember. These are important numbers. Ford has a market cap of $56 billion. Ford delivered 1.1 million vehicles in the first quarter of 2023 compared to Rivian's not less than 8,000. Ford's revenue was $41.5 billion. They earned $3.4 billion in what's called EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes. Rivian, in the same quarter, lost $1.35 billion. All right, you heard all these numbers. Would you, common sense person listening to this show, say that these two companies, only one of them, Rivian, would be worth nearly 25% of Ford? No one would. So what is Rivian's stock price based on? It's based on hope. Now, could Rivian become the next, like we said in our show last week, it was intended to be a slab-sided truck and SUV equivalent or competitor, to Tesla. So could it become, the next version of Tesla? Possibly, maybe. But if you're looking at something where, again, remember, this show is geared towards you all in retirement, nearer in retirement. If you're holding a large position in a company like Rivian that is in a traditional industry, even though they're electronic vehicle manufacturer, they're still in the business of producing cars and trucks. And you're saying, hey, this stock is worth 25% of Ford, which is a gorilla size compared to Rivian's little itty bitty monkey, then I think you're going to be holding on to that thing for a long time for it to actually prove. So was I wrong in the amount of deliveries of Rivian?
Way off.
I'll eat that. Was I right overall my point? Yes.
Maybe.
Yes. All right. What you got next?
Okay. You said recently that you thought artificial intelligence, known as AI, would be more of a threat to the job security of investment and money managers than it would be to financial planners. Well, let's look at some recent news. It appears that JP Morgan Chase has recently introduced and patented, I might add, a new stock trading advisory chatbot called Index GPT. Here's a word salad definition for you. The product provides temporary use of online, non-downloadable cloud computing software using artificial intelligence for use in computer software selection of financial securities and financial assets. Got all that?
End quote, I hope.
That's it. But it's a lot. So JP Morgan Chase is claiming it's not trying to displace actual money managers, but industry experts say it's only a matter of time. I tend to agree. So did you know this opinion coming out of your big mouth?
All right. So first, let's define
the difference.
The difference. All right. So most times historically, when people think about financial advisors or people that do what I do, historically, they kind of think of us as in money managers or investment managers. And they're not totally wrong. A good financial planner should at least have some level of expertise or experience in helping you pick positions, pick funds, ETFs, mutual funds, all these things, bond funds. They should be able to know the difference and have, at least, if nothing else, at least have a defined strategy on how they invest your money, right? Now, what you have is a carryover of the old days, like you and I talked on a previous episode, where the financial advisor position, as I'm currently constituted, really hasn't existed for that many decades. Historically, it was brokers. Brokers, if you ever seen the movie Wall Street,
of course,
they call you up. They say, hey, I got, if you buy 1,000 shares of blah, blah, XYZ, it's going to shoot the moon, right? That was kind of the thing. So what we're seeing is for people that are strictly managing money, or strictly investment management, or maybe even the broker world, I do think I'm right with my opinion that there's going to be pressure with this artificial intelligence, because the thing is, when you're hiring a money manager, particularly if you've got an actively managed account, you're looking towards the expertise and the experience of that money manager to help pick the positions inside that fund. Well, if you've got artificial intelligence can look at millions of data points to do said thing in replacing a human brain, it's just a matter of time. Is it going to work? That's not my argument, Michelle. I'm not arguing that it's going to be right. I'm just saying that there's going to be pressure on the investment management side of our business. Contrast that to where the majority of the business is heading, where I think it's heading, is in the financial planning space. With financial planning, the main thing that we do at Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, investment management is a piece of it. It's always an important piece, but it's just a piece of the overall puzzle. We talk about estate planning, we talk about wills and trusts in this episode. That ties into a comprehensive financial plan. How do all the pieces of your estate, of your life, of your money, of your investments, of your heirs, how do all these things tie together? And that is going to be way harder for a machine or a computer to have their arms around all of these things, because there's such a strong human element in it. It's not about picking the next best stock. It's about picking what is the best path forward in your life as a financial planner.
Individualized, yeah.
Yep. So I think I was right.
Okay. Well, people are the best and the worst.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But I prefer people.
There is pressure, though, for sure.
Okay. Yeah. So you've also said that most Americans don't take the time to write a will until they have a significant health scare, and that most Americans don't create an estate plan because they don't feel like their estate is valuable enough to warrant one. And a recent poll called Will and Estate Planning Survey found that while the overall percentage of people with a will has noticeably increased since COVID, still nearly 2/3 of Americans do not have a will or estate plan. So do you still hold to your opinions on the reason why so many people hesitate to take the time to write a will or develop an estate plan?
Well, so let's talk about the will first, Michelle. You and I have been on Earth long enough that the thought of being able to go on a computer and pull up a website and download a will and fill in the blanks and print it and sign it and move on would have seen...
And notarize it and have witnesses.
Right. It would have been like, okay, and that's it. It's that easy right now. It is literally that easy.
You can actually write it on the back of a napkin.
So why doesn't everybody do it?
Because they're scared of dying.
Well, they're scared of dying.
And they don't think they have enough stuff to, do something like that.
Well, that's fair. I would argue with the estate planning piece for sure with that. But I think a lot of it, I think you're right. They are scared of having the mortality conversation. But I think a lot of it is they're so uncomfortable talking about it with their heirs.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. And I think especially when you've got a sizable estate and you've got multiple heirs, again, we're going to hammer home this point.
I don't have either of those things, so I'm in good shape.
Good for you. But a lot of people, if you do, and you're having trouble getting that conversation kicked off, I really strongly encourage you to reach out, form a professional team. Typically, that professional team is going to be an attorney, typically an estate planning attorney. That's going to be a financial advisor, and it's going to be sometimes a CPA. Let them come in and help you get that conversation going. And while you can print and fill in the blanks a will online just fine, especially if you've got a small estate. For any of y'all that have a larger estate, or even what I'd call medium to large estate, and you've got a bunch of heirs, it's worth the extra, I don't know, hundreds, maybe a few $1,000s.
Even that, lots of times you can do it. It's not expensive.
If your estate is $5 to $10 million, don't throw a fit about paying $5 to $10 grand to get this stuff settled. It's a fraction, and the amount that
I wouldn't even know if it would be
and
that
that's
much.
high.
That's
a lot
very
of times.
high. Yeah.
Right. So you get the idea. Keep it proportional to not only your total size of your estate, but also keep it proportional to the amount of heartache and headache and hurt feelings that you're going to have to deal with if you don't address it now. So we can help with that. 251-327-2124, at least from a financial planning perspective, and introductions to estate planning attorneys. We got time for one more?
Sure. So the
No,
last,
I'm not ready for this one, just so the listeners know. I'm not prepared.
you're not. You're just gonna.
I'm gonna wing it.
Okay. All right.
I got my
Let's
feet
do
on
it.
the ground.
Okay. Last one. Josh, you said that after the bank collapses of regional banks, SVB and Signature Bank, that not only would folks be nervous about holding large deposits at smaller and regional banks, but they would also do flight to quality, less risky types of investments, such as money market funds.
Was I right or wrong?
Yeah. I mean,
Oh my gosh! You know what? We kind of made. Did I whiff on anything on this segment?
okay, let's see.
I lift a little. This one, yeah, absolutely. You've seen a flight to quality when everything got shook up. And Michelle specifically referenced money market funds. Money market funds are mutual funds that are considered, they're not considered cash, but they're considered cash equivalents. Typically, they will hold ultra short-term debt instruments that can be municipal, that can be federal, that can be a variety of debt instruments that are trade really short time periods.
Muni bonds aren't doing so well, though, were they?
So they're considered, well, yeah, they've come, yeah. Muni bonds that had a long lead time got their butts kicked over the past year, as did most bonds and fixed instruments. But now you've got money market funds paying in the high 4s, low 5s. And what you're seeing is for those that have been a little bit spooked by both what happened with the bank failures, which we've talked about in previous episodes, but also just with the overall volatility of the market, you have absolutely seen a flight to quality. You've seen, I don't know how many billions, it's probably trillions at this point, Michelle, money that has flooded into money market funds. You've seen a lot of people going back to bonds. Now the bond prices have come more in line with what's happened with the interest rates. Not that your regular investors, particularly those of you all listening to the show that have a long time horizon, there's nothing wrong with owning bonds. There's nothing wrong with owning money market account funds. Just remember, over the long haul, none of these things are necessarily by design intended to keep up with the upside appreciation that could potentially happen with equity or stock market positions. However, for those of you in or near retirement, it is absolutely, for the first time in early my career and over the last 12 months, it is a worthwhile conversation we're having of, hey, we can park this money in a money market and we can get high 4s, low 5s, and we can kind of wait out some of this volatility while we make some of our decisions. So great point. Great article. All right. So is that it?
That's it.
All right. So listeners, I hope you enjoyed a peek behind the curtain on how I form my opinions and predictions. And more importantly, that I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong, which, as you've seen in this segment, is very often. But still, now to our listeners that have more questions about the various investments and topics we discussed in this segment, we invite you to reach out to us.
Maybe Rivian will donate you a vehicle since you were so off on that.
Watch it. Yeah, 2 years from now, we'll bring up Rivian. It'll be worth like $5 trillion or some nonsense. Who knows, right?
I hope they give you one.
We'll see. I don't think it's going to happen. They are, to be fair, I know Rivian guys, I know you're listening. The head guy there is pretty smart. He's wicked smart, to be fair. So anyway, if you want to continue the conversation, why don't you give us a call, 251-327-2124. Or, of course, you can always make an appointment on our website. That's gulfcoastfa.com. Gulf like the Gulf of Mexico, coast like what's in the show title, FA is in financialadvisor.com. All right, folks, that's it for us here this week on Coasting in Retirement. I want to give a huge thank you to my lovely co-host, Michelle Lee Melton.
Very welcome.
Yes, a thank you to our awesome radio station, FM Talk 106.5. Many thanks to our provider of our show music, that's local band Sloth Racer. Sloth is in the slow animal. And we did this last week. I'm going to do it again, Michelle. For those of you all that are looking for a band that will play a private event, like a wedding or other type of events where you want to bring in a local band, give them a call. Franklin, the guys, they're young guys, they're hustlers, they're great. They got great personalities. We cannot thank them enough, and we always enjoy getting to listen to them. And then lastly, and of course not least, always my sincere appreciation for all of you out there that have been listening and joining us on this journey. We'd obviously love to be a part of your journey as well. So until we talk again next Sunday, have a wonderful and productive week. This has been Coasting in Retirement with Josh Knoll.
Advisory services offered through Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, a federally registered investment advisor. Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, 6201 College Boulevard, 7th floor, Overland Park, Kansas, 66211. Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, doing business as Prime Capital Wealth Management and Qualified Plan Advisors, and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors are not affiliated. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, Prime Capital Investment Advisors, Prime Capital Wealth Management, and Qualified Plan Advisors do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. This content has been prepared for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. The information provided herein is not a complete analysis of every material fact regarding any strategy. It is intended only to provide insight into the opinions of the author. All information presented is for educational purposes only and is not an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Content offers commentary and generalized research, not personalized investment advice, and is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a complete description of our investment services or performance. All investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified legal professional and/or tax professional before implementing any strategy discussed here.